Now we're going to talk about the actual job interview. This is the one that I think is hard to prepare for. You have to be sensitive to what's going on, and there is nothing I'm going to say in this video that suggests that you should be rude or ask questions in a belligerent way or anything like that, even though in this video I may express them that way, because I'm trying to make a point. Perhaps something in here will be helpful in changing your mental attitude toward an interview. Will perhaps give you some questions to ask either at the end or sprinkled throughout. But nothing I'm saying says you should be anything other than the polite person that you're going to be if you want a job. Now, the first thing I want to say is that you're probably nervous about the interview. It could affect your career, the rest of your life. Maybe you're taking it very seriously. You're nervous. As a matter of fact, you probably don't even want to do it. But I'll tell you, you might understand that the person or persons conducting the, what I call three-head interview, where they're trying to meet you to see if you got three heads, that person probably does not like interviewing people. If they're from HR and they do it a lot, they're probably not going to be your supervisor. They're probably there with someone who is likely to be your supervisor, or who you may assume will be your supervisor. I'm going to say some things that suggest maybe there are 2 or 3 people doing the interviewing. Even if there's only one, that still raises questions that you might want to ask. I always feel kind of flat-footed at the end where they say, well, you got any questions? And I'm thinking, no, I really can't think of any questions. But there are some that you should ask. And there are some things that you should verify, because you may make certain assumptions, and it would really be nice if you could validate them. Some of the things that I suggest in this video, you may want to wait and find out later. And how aggressive you are in finding out some things will frankly depend upon how desperate you are for a job. You may need this job if you can possibly get it. Maybe you have people dependent upon you. Maybe you don't have a job. And I understand completely, and I don't mean to disrespect you. However, if you have a job or you're not desperate, you need to approach the interview perhaps differently than you're thinking. You need to interview them as much as they're interviewing you. Now, by interviewing them doesn't necessarily mean you ask a lot of questions, but it may. So the people who are interviewing you may be no good at it. It may be the least happy job, part of their job that they have. So it's been my experience that when you encounter these kind of people, and you can kind of detect it, and they don't have a big list of questions they want to ask you, that if you, in some sense, take control of the interview, you will be doing them a favor and they will be grateful. Now, how do you do that? I don't mean you actually exert control over them to where, like, you're the alpha dog and they're not. But what I mean is they're there to find out about you. So if you start talking and saying things that give them insight to you and your past and your experience, without them having to dig for it, they're likely to be grateful. Very different than the technical interview. Technical interview, shut up and answer the questions asked. Here they're trying to find out about you. They may not be professional at it. In my opinion, most of them will not be comfortable doing it. Now, you have to judge the situation when you get in there and act accordingly. But you might even view it as a performance. You know, if you were a stand-up comedian, not that you want to be during the interview, but these people are your audience. And you're trying to engage them. And the more you're able to do that, especially for people who don't like to interview, the more likely it's going to be a good interview. Now, I personally don't think I have a problem with that. I've done a lot of performing and certain sorts of things. As a matter of fact, if there was a job description out there that says, Joe, we're looking for somebody, and all he's going to do is interview for other jobs, I'd take it in a heartbeat, because I love being interviewed. It's all about me. And while going around talking all about me all the time is going to be really tedious on the people around me, this is a circumstance where it is appropriate, so long as you're telling things that are relevant. And it doesn't have to be technically relevant. It can have to do with problem solving in general, interacting with others, telling how you have participated in other work groups or projects or whatever, how you've contributed, how you've enjoyed it, how you look forward to more experiences like that in the future. So think about not being too introverted during the interview. Now, there's a certain aspect of interviews that does make me uncomfortable, and that's because if I just meet a group of people under different circumstances, I like to sit back and observe, learn things about other people, let them learn things about me slowly over time, and let them form their own opinion, which they're ultimately going to do anyway. I don't like to go in and say, look at me, let me tell you all this stuff. But in an interview, you almost have to. So you're kind of thinking, yeah, I want to show what I've got, but I also need to leave these people feeling that, yes, well, I think I'm the hottest shit that a God ever made, that once you work for them, they are the boss. They make the decisions that you implement, and if you don't like it, go someplace else. Hopefully, they'll be willing to listen to ideas you have. And these are the kind of things you should have in the back of your mind. What is your relationship with these people? Now, you might be interviewing a big corporation, and you're worried, oh my goodness, what if they hire me and I don't do a good job? Whatever happens here is going to follow me around the rest of my life. And the answer is that very well may be true. Decisions employers make that affect employees, or former employees, negatively, has a lot more impact on you than your opinion of working there, although you can and maybe should post your experiences and opinions on websites. I think Glassdoor is one of them that asks for your opinion. So it's true, we have an unfair relationship here in some sense. And that they have an influence over you, especially if you accept the job, more than you will have over them or the company in the long term. But when you're meeting with these people, here's what I think you should have in the back of your mind. Companies, businesses, corporations do not make decisions. People make decisions. And they're not necessarily better people than you are. Let me tell a little story to try and give a flavor of this. This may not be a good example. Suppose you go to the bar. And you're there, and to a certain extent, everybody in the bar is a peer. You don't have to talk to them. They don't have to talk to you. But suppose you start talking to someone who's articulate, educated. They tell you they have a job. It impresses you. You may think, yeah, this guy I kind of admire him. But you're still not going to kiss his ass for no reason at all. You're in a bar, you're peers. If this guy says, oh, would you lend me $50? You might say, I don't know you well enough, or whatever. Someone in that situation who may go on to become a friend or whatever, they have to earn your respect. that guy might be the guy who interviews you the next day, or the kind of person who does. These people that you're interviewing with are people, and as people, they are not inherently superior to you. As a matter of fact, you might be able to contrive some situation. Let's suppose you're a big do-gooder in the community. You're on various volunteer things, and somebody comes to you auditioning, interviewing to participate in your volunteer activities of your organization. That could be anybody, from the lowest position in some company to a very exalted one. We could fix a situation where you were actually interviewing them. Literally. Now, unless you're desperate, you should use this interview to determine if you want to work for these people and with these people. And let's suggest some things you might do. I'm going to imagine that there are maybe 3 people there interviewing you. They all know each other. They've told you their names and their titles, which you will probably immediately forget. And even if you don't, and you try to judge the relationship among these people in a business chart organization style, you may very well be wrong. At some point, you might want to ask, maybe at the end, who works for who? Who is going to be my immediate supervisor? It turns out that some organizations are like hospitals, other than hospitals. You know, they have a whole hierarchy of medical professionals. At the top is, say, the chief of staff. On the other side, they have an administrative hierarchy. And that's something that would be present in any kind of business, tailored to this kind of business. But there are 2 hierarchies. And you might want to determine, is there more than one hierarchy here? What happens if the hierarchies each tell me to do something, not immediately obvious, but there's some ultimate conflict? What do I do? Now, the obvious thing to say is, well, you ask. And of course, that's great. But sometimes knowing what the hierarchy will tell you who to ask first. You might want to ask the guy lower in the hierarchy. So when you get the job, I'm jumping ahead to that, I guess. Because then he can say, oh, no, Bill, do what he says. If you go to Bill first, he's going to say, well, John, he told you that, he knows better. So you basically try to do your inquiries at the lowest level. You want to know the relationship among these people. You want to know who you're going to report to, who's your technical supervisor, who's your management supervisor, if they're different, and they are different in many organizations. You want to get this straight then, because you're going to be forming opinions about whether you want to work for them or not. If you're not ever interviewed by the person that is going to be your immediate supervisor, I think that's weird. And I'll tell you why, because I'll get back to this later, I hope. But to me, the most significant thing that affects your happiness in the job is your immediate supervisor. That person can get a little pressure on the top and then just dump all over the people below them. Or they can try to be a reasonable intermediary between the needs of the organization and you. That's going to affect your life. Now, even when I say that, I'm thinking, well, Joe, that guy might not forever be your supervisor. You may get a better one, you may get a worse one, you may not. And that's true. But you're trying to make a decision based on what you know now. And this is the best information you're going to get, the best impression you're going to get before you are hired, if you're hired. And so this is your one shot. If you think you're in the amount of the interview, you're thinking this guy's an egotistical jerk and I'm going to be working for him, and you're not desperate, that should figure in how you decide whether to accept a job. Once again, these are all factors. I don't know if any factor that I'm going to be discussing, any one factor should be dispositive. But these are things you can think about. You could ask, is one of you going to be my immediate technical supervisor? Or other managers. See, I'll tell you, a lot of managers become managers because they don't want to have to keep up with the technology. While even thinking, oh, it's enough that I know what I know. But a lot of people want to get out of that rat race. Some of us love it. But they, oh my God, I have to learn this and this and this. No, let me be the manager. That's a rather static set of skills they view. If they do it right, they should be viewing it as a continuing education and expansion of their knowledge and skills as well. But I'm not so sure you should expect that. So you need to evaluate these people. You might say, you know, none of you are my supervisor. Who is it going to be if I am hired? Can I meet that person? Certain things may be a part of the job description that I don't think hurt to ask anyway. You should read the job description before you go to the interview. They probably will not. And you see, tell me about the people I'm working with. Am I being hired to work on a specific project? Will I be working on a specific project or across multiple projects? Will I be working with one group or multiple groups? Who are the people that I'm going to be working closest with? May I meet them? Can you tell me something about them? And I think it would be good that you meet them. I mean, you're going to have a first impression. I'm inclined to be very doubtful about my first impressions. I know they will change in some regard. They may be completely wrong. But this is your chance to get some feel for things before you're hired. It may be that everyone there in IT has been there forever. That can be a good sign. It means they're happy there. By default, I would say it is a good sign. But suppose you learn a little bit by gently asking questions and discover the reasons they're there is because their skills are so obsolete that they couldn't get another job. I worked at a place once where the attitude was, well, if they want me to have training, they need to give it to me. I'm not going to learn anything on my own. Well, those people are not employable at the moment, in my own mind, knowing how long ago I knew them, if they kept that attitude. You are responsible for your skill set. Whether it automatically increases by being at a job or you get training or whatever. So find out about who you're going to be working with. Different groups. Am I doing the same job as some other people? Again, this may have been presented to you in the job interview, a part of the discussion. I don't think it hurts to ask those questions again. Especially the ones where, when you think about it, you realize you're inferring a lot of things without being told them. There's another thing that happens in the interview that I think is odd. Well, not odd, weird maybe. People like to ask these questions that are almost like they're being psychologists. And they would fall in the category of, what's your greatest weakness? And what are the three most important things about a job? There are a whole string of them. Most of them are worse than that, and I wasn't going to bother to look them up because I'm hoping you'll recognize the type of question that I'm asking about. Now, those two questions, I'll tell you what my answers are because I have some that are genuine and I think revealing. But in general, those questions are supposed to work best if they catch you off guard or something, let them discover something of you that isn't prepared. But there are whole websites telling you how to answer those questions. What do they think they're really going to learn from that? Now, I may be very wrong about that, and I'll tell you what it would take to convince me that a lot of these, what I call psychological type questions, being asked by people who are not psychologists. What it would take to convince me that they're meaningful. And that is, and maybe if you know somebody's done this study, I'd love to read it. I could easily be wrong. At this point, I don't think so. I need to be persuaded. What you do is you get some people who are employing, preferably a bunch, same organization, not, whatever. And they come up with a standard list of, I'm going to call them touchy-feely questions. I don't know what to call them. And so you get it so that they ask the questions of everybody, and especially for the people that they wind up hiring, they record their answers. Then you go back a year later. You do not show them what they wrote a year earlier. And you give them a questionnaire. Maybe if you have a lot of time, you make a multiple choice. And ask them to describe the person that they hired. What is their greatest weakness? Now, you may not think that it is what they thought it was. But maybe in your multiple choice list, you're going to cover some of the important points. What I want to know is, can we prove that the decision you make, in part based on these questions, correlate to the person you wound up hiring? I would be very surprised if the answer were yes. These questions are what I kind of call one of life's many intelligence tests, or subsets of intelligence tests that life gives you for your entire life. A lot of those questions people are asking because they don't know what to ask. So they go to some website and say, oh, this will be revealing. Oh, I better ask that because I don't know what else to do. Well, you're going to save those people by, to some degree, taking over the interview if you can. Again, it's a tough balance between being a know-it-all, I'm going to tell everybody what to do when it isn't my job. But let me tell you what my greatest weakness is, and I tell people in advance. You're going to give me a job to do. There's going to be described in the job description, and I expect it to be that job. But your organization has other expectations, many of them very reasonable. You got to do timesheets. You got to do this. You got to do that. But if there's a lot of that, and I'll describe what a lot of that is maybe in a minute, I'm not good at that. I like to focus on the job, prioritize things in my mind, and if there are all these other things that are making some bureaucrat in the administrative chain of authority happy to justify that job, I'm not going to be good at it. I'm not going to be belligerent. I'm going to try to do it. But I'm sort of ADHD. Well, not sort of, I am. And having all these things, I don't really handle it very well. And it isn't out of disrespect. It's that I prioritize things, and if my job is customer service, or mentoring, or teaching, or doing some of all of those things, some of these other things get just a lower priority in my mind, and I can't keep track of them. Even making lists and doing all of that kind of thing. So, let me give a little bit of an example here. When I worked at Microsoft, there were 11 layers of management between me and Steve Ballmer. And every one of them had to justify their existence. So my manager had a manager who had a manager all the way up. And those people liked to assign tasks to people that could be judged in metrics. Did you read these documents? Did you watch these things that were job specific or not job specific about the company? Videos? Did you do this? Did you check these boxes? We create websites for you to keep track of all of these things. And then what the managers wound up doing in order to make their guys, the closest managers do, look better than the other guys is they'd run metrics on the other people's employees. None of these had a damn thing to do with serving the customer. Or very few of them did. That kind of stuff I think is kind of stupid. But that's not my reason for not being good at it. I can't be good at it. I'm just not. Now, I recently was contacted by Microsoft to see if I wanted to apply for a job that would have eliminated a lot of that, I think. But I would have had to move to Fargo, North Dakota, and that was a deal breaker for me. Sorry if you live in Fargo. I got family here. My dog's here. I could take him with me. So, how much of that stuff is there? Some companies, you do your job and you go home. Some companies, you do your job and you just started. They may talk about work-life balance, but you sold your soul to that company. And that may be fine. Some people thrive in that environment. Some of us don't. Now, I don't want you to confuse what I just said about my weakness with the fact that I know when I have a job, priorities are going to change. You work on this, and the boss is going to come say, I know I told you this is the most important thing. You've got to do this. As a matter of fact, 2 or 3 times a day, that may happen. That's not what I'm talking about. I can change focus and do what I need to. But things which I will describe as bullshit, I don't do well. And not really because I think they're bullshit. Got it. Now, I don't give an answer that long. For one thing, when I've been asked that question, I didn't have that much organization. But, you know, when I went to Microsoft, they said, what's your greatest weakness? And I said, well, you know, you're going to have timesheets, and that's legitimate, and some other bureaucratic things, and I'm not going to do well at that. And I didn't. I did well enough at my core job, which was serving customers and doing the things I needed to do that. And actually even doing things necessary to have the company make money. As far as the other thing goes, what are your 3 most important things you look for in a job? I've already told you one of them. It's the immediate supervisor. That person is going to make my life hell, or they're going to make it a wonderful experience. The second thing is going to be whether there are any challenges and or things that make me feel I've achieved something. I have to feel good about myself at the job. And then the third one is whether there's the bureaucratic bullshit that's going to make me hate my job, because I won't do it well. So I've got answers for those questions that are honest and whatever. But if you understand, if enough people make notes that they say, oh, we don't know what you're talking about, I'll go to a website, find someone, paste them in the description. But I think you probably know what I'm talking about. So let's see if I can summarize some of this. You should not go in on your hands and knees on a job unless you're desperate. You should not respect these people more as human beings than you respect yourself. Now, I'm not saying anybody's going to try to humiliate you or anything like that, but there are people that like to be the hottest shit in the room. Do you want to work for those people? You need to figure out what the chain of authority is. Some of that can wait. You definitely need to meet the person who is going to be your supervisor. I call this type of interview the 3-head interview because you've passed the technical part, and one of the things is to meet you and see, does this guy have 3 heads? Not meaning 3 heads, but meaning is there something that we can't discover? What do we find out about their personality? How they communicate? How they interact with people? How they accept some criticism, which they may give you in the interview, just to see how you respond. And you should be thinking along the same lines, again with respect, but you are forming an opinion about them. And even if you ask no questions when it comes to the point you have any questions, you are interviewing them. You are forming an opinion about them as best you can, because they're doing as best they can with you. Once you get the job, it will certainly change, but this is the best you've got at the moment. So you need to take advantage of it. You need to respect yourself going in. You need to realize until proven otherwise that while you're nervous and they don't like this, they're probably nervous and don't like having to do it. And you can help them with that, as I've discussed. I hope this is helpful. Please comment as you see fit. And I hope to learn something from the comments.